Can you hear me now? Yeah, there we go. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night to those who are watching us online. Thank you for being with us here today. And as the moderator introduced, my name is Jayatma Vikramanayaka. I'm the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Youth. I work as an advisor and a representative of UN Secretary General on all matters related to young people. And of course, education is one big issue and an opportunity that young people care about. So I'm extremely privileged to be here with the distinguished panelists today. And I thank the Transforming Education Summit Secretariat for the kind invitation. When he presented the idea for a Transforming Education Summit in Our Common Agenda report of the Secretary General, he said that we stand in the crossroads of history, that all actions or inactions today will determine whether we break down or break through the current multifaceted crises that we are facing as humanity. And education is key to secure a breakthrough for people and for the planet, with young people at the front and center. However, for that, we must transform education and education systems, and young people's views, their recommendations, and most importantly, their commitments must be at the front and center. So with that in mind, us at the United Nations have come together to support young people in a youth-led process to gather their collective voice in a youth declaration that will be presented to world leaders at the Transforming Education Summit. And I want to share the two main purposes of the youth declaration that we will be discussing today. The first one is we have this pre-summit. We also have multiple conversations happening in the online space on social media through the social media campaigns. And up until September, we will have many conversations of what it means to transform education. But we want to capture all of them into one succinct document to really say that as youth collectively, this is what we are demanding from world leaders. So to feed into the chair's summary of the Transforming Education Summit, this youth declaration will play a role. And the second objective of the youth declaration is that it will be a compendium of the views, recommendations, and commitments from young people when it comes to transforming education. To clarify a little bit about the process, and Doris will do that later in the conversation as well, this is a completely youth-led process. As the UN, we are only playing a supportive role and a facilitated role. The young people will lead and convene and draft and really finalize the youth declaration for the Transforming Education Summit. And it will not be reinventing the wheel. We will be looking at, in this process, also the previous consultations that have been done with young people. For an example, for the Futures of Education report launched by UNESCO, the outcomes of different summits, the Rewired Summit, the Big Brainstorm from Unlock the Future Coalition, and so many more consultations that have led us to this point. And we'll also gather these views, recommendations, and commitments through the world's largest lesson survey on futures of education, the U Report poll by UNICEF, and also the online activation and the social media campaign by UNESCO. So there are multiple ways to feed into the declaration, but the first in-person consultation with young people will be tomorrow, 8 to 10 a.m. And I hope that all of you will be there, and the thoughts that you shared today in these sessions will also, you will bring into the youth consultation tomorrow, which will really be for us the foundation to start working on the compilation of the youth declaration. With that in mind, I'm excited to talk to our panelists about the youth declaration, what it means and how it can be implemented. First of all, Doris Mikali. Doris, you're an executive member of the SDG 4 Youth Network and one of the many young people who are driving this process. I want to ask from you, as a young person and as youth activists who've been working on education issues for a long time, what are your expectations from the youth declaration, and why is it important to have a youth declaration?
Hello. Hello? Hello? Oh, thank you. My name is Doris Mukali. As introduced, I am the youth representative to the Sherpa Group at the High Level Steering Committee. One of the reasons why I think our youth declaration is an important because it's an instrument for us to hold ourselves as young people accountable and hold stakeholders accountable. I think, just a random question, how many people here don't work at the education sector? How many people here do not work in education? Fantastic, 3 people or 4 people. And do you know why that is dangerous? Because we already know that there's an education crisis. We already know the need of putting young people at the center of transforming education. And we don't need to be talking amongst ourselves. We need to be talking to other people that are not working with education for them to understand the current learning crisis and for them to understand the importance of transforming conventional learning system. That's what needs to be done. So the Youth Declaration will give us an opportunity to communicate as young people, to come together, to strategically mobilize, to draw attention to the current learning crisis. So the young people that are going to join us here tomorrow for the consultation and the young people that have been in the process of consultation, as the UN Youth Envoy has mentioned, there have been ongoing consultations. You need to speak to people that are outside the education sector because we already know what is going on. We already understand the crisis, but that's not the point. We don't need to be talking amongst ourselves. We need to be tagging the Minister of Finance. You need to be talking to the Minister of Environment for them to understand the need for environmental education. You need to be speaking to your gender minister to them to understand education so that all stakeholders can understand at the end of the day, education is foundational for us to transition into a sustainable future. So the Youth Declaration is an instrument for us to do that, for us to strategically mobilize for political momentum and commitment. As we have said, this is a political summit, right? It is not a technical summit. So I am a bit worried, and I hope you challenge yourself after this Youth Declaration, after all the inspirational conversation, to talk to somebody outside this bubble. Those are the people we need to understand what is going on. Tag people that are outside this place. Tag people that work in science, people that are working in IT, for them to understand at the end of the day, you go to one core thing, education. Because the climate movement has been able to do a fantastic job rallying the entire community to understand why we have a climate crisis. We need to do the same as young people. And the Youth Declaration will give us an opportunity to do that. So as young people also, we need to also communicate it in a very fun way. It doesn't need to be another document that will gather dust after New York. So we need to strategically know how to communicate our priorities that are within the Youth Declaration. Do a TikTok, pick one segment that you care about. If it's IT, tweet about that. Do a TikTok about it. Do a live about it and speak to the people in your community why ministers of education need to prioritize this, why they need to budget this, why there's a learning crisis, why it's important for every single child in the world to learn. You know, we need to do this. So I think the Youth Declaration is an opportunity to do that. But as young people, we are 15% of the population. It is our responsibility to mobilize strategically. We don't need to come to Paris, take pictures at UNESCO and say we have done something. We have a great opportunity here, a unique opportunity for the Transforming Education Summit to gather political momentum outside the education sector. That is what is needed. And it is that political and strategic advocacy that is going to push leaders in New York to really understand why they need to prioritize education. So for young people, please come tomorrow for the consultation and mobilize outside. I really don't want us to talk amongst ourselves. Everybody here cares about education. I don't think there's anybody who thinks education is not fun or important, but we need to speak outside. And that's what the Youth Declaration is going to do for us. So please come, share it, and also take an opportunity to share it within your community, because I've had a lot of young people here recognizing about their privilege. I'm also privileged to be here, but just don't recognize it. Do something about it. Go to your community and gather the voices of other young people and bring it as part of the consultation, because the consultation doesn't just end here tomorrow. We're going to be continuing doing consultation till New York. Use your privilege in a constructive way. Go and talk to the young people in your communities that are not able to join these consultations. Ask them, challenge them, and let us mobilize strategically. As young people, we need to stop waiting for stakeholders to create spaces for us. We are 15% of the population. We could make this thing stop. We need to come together strategically, and we need to put education at the forefront of everything that is done by governments. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Doris, for reminding us of the power of youth, but also strategies to really use the declaration process more inclusive, but also impactful, right? Now I want to turn to His Excellency Santiago Maurao, the President of the General Conference of UNESCO. Your Excellency, Doris spoke about how it is important to reach out to the Minister of Education, the Minister of Finance, and as a part of my advocacy for this summit, I've asked the member states based out of New York to include young people as much as possible in their national consultations, either leading up to the summit or will happen in the course of the summit or after the summit. So we're trying to get as many as youth voices heard here in the pre-summit, in the actual summit, and in the national consultations. But what can we do to actually make sure that at the end of the day, policymakers don't just listen to young people and say thank you and let them go home, but they actually take action on the demands and the recommendations of young people?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for this question. I think it's a very important question. I cannot say anything else than Doris has already said, so I think the answer is there. What I can say is that the fact that we have decided to start this conference, this meeting, this summit with this youth forum is already a symbol, is already an understanding on all of us on our side that listen to young people, listen to the youth is crucial. In other words, it's not simple saying that it's the right of youth to speak and to say. It is the necessity. We have to listen to that. You have not only the right, but you have the duty, and this is something that we are very glad to see here. And it is an experience that UNESCO has had. It's the first organization that had a youth forum. I had the opportunity of closing the 12th youth forum here in November during the 41st General Assembly as President of the conference, General Conference, and it was very important, and the document has been incorporated to the documentation, and it's part of the documentation that is today under the consideration and is part of the reflection of ministers of education in all the countries that are members of this constituency. Therefore, it's important. And it's important to listen because if it is true that the crisis, the pandemic crisis and all has been is global, but it has impact in very different ways, and different solutions has been thought and has been implemented in different places. And this is something fundamental for all this process, which is we have to start thinking first that we cannot work with the idea of one size fits all. This is something that we have to look at the very different situations in order to bring them all and make sure that all these experiences are taken into consideration. All the solutions that have been presented are taken into consideration so as we can get a feeling of the situation in which we are, which, frankly speaking, we get out of this pandemic crisis in a worse shape than we imagined that we will go. So we are now, and we have now, the great opportunity, all of us, to work on a new contract, new social contract, in all the areas, and education is one of them. Maybe it's the most important. We can discuss that, but frankly, I think it's the most important. So we are going to start from now on to see what's coming ahead. And we have to discuss that because it's an uncharted universe that is in front of us, an uncharted world. We do not know exactly. It is time for us to think, sit around, having in mind that we have to work and act very quickly and very strongly. That's why we have to look at how we are going to go through and make better to solve the divides that we see in our societies, not only the divide of gender, the digital divide, etc., the lack of opportunities, equal opportunities for all. And it is important to have all of you here because you represent here the largest portion of the humanity today. I think historically we haven't had that many young people around. We are 52% or around that, so it's an enormous potential that must be heard, must be listened to, and that has suffered during this period in so strong ways, not only in the lack of education, but in other areas. And you have shown during this period your creativity, to your resilience, the creativity to use these new technologies that are here. So you have to bring this experience for all of us. We are, some of us fast learners, others like me slow learners. But anyway, you have to bring all these ideas to the table. And as you have said, Doris, you have to fight for them. Because something that we learn very quickly is that things are still the same until they change. But what is true is that they don't change alone. You have to change them. Otherwise, they keep us as there is. So I will assure you that as president of the conference, I will make sure that your ideas, your documentation, your report will be channeled to the conference in New York in September. But not only there, we are going to make sure that all these ideas will be landed in the office of the Secretary General, so he can read them, he can listen to them in order to write his report at the end. So this common agenda, which is a common agenda not only for the organization, a common agenda for the UN family, is a common agenda for the international community, and this is the way that we are going to move, important way, in order to have a new contract, social contract, in which all of us, youth included, and very, very strong participation, we have to, all of us be engaged in this process. Thank you very much. Thank you, Doris. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It's great to have your commitment in terms of supporting the Youth Declaration and to have your trust even before you saw it. You have committed to take it and take it into action. So thank you for that. Now I want to turn to my colleague Leonardo Garnier, who is the Special Advisor for the Transforming Education Summit. Leonardo, the President, was talking about, for an example, the importance of financing education and how it has to be a part of the new social contract. And we've heard throughout the summit the same call of action by young people. We've heard young people demanding for climate education. We've heard young people demanding for human rights education, sexual and reproductive health education. But we don't see those demands necessarily reflected in our national action plans or national budgets. There's this huge gap between what the experts and what the young people and what the students want versus what our leaders are doing. And I think that the Transforming Education Summit is a great opportunity to bridge that gap and bring these two together. What opportunities do you think we can create in addition to this youth declaration within the summit process to bridge that gap and bring young people, students, and policymakers to the same table?
Yes. You listen? No. Now? Yeah. Thank you, Hijab. I think, first of all, I'm part of a generation that was known as baby boomers. My daughters now say I'm just a boomer. And what I've seen is that people from our generation, adults, teachers, politicians, they don't have a very good image of the new generations, be them millennials or centennials or Gen Xs or whatever. They tend to think that young people of today is weak, not interested in serious things. They just want to be in social networks and have a good time. They don't really have a long-term job, and all the things that you can imagine. They are so wrong. And when you talk, as you were saying, with young people, they are absolutely interested in all those things. I remember, to quote again my daughters, because they teach you a lot, once I told them, "Why aren't you interested in politics?" And they looked at me as, "What do you mean? Of course we're interested in politics. We just don't like your parties." And that's the case. The new generations usually do things in a different way than the older generations. Not so long ago, May 1968, very young baby boomers were here in Paris taking the streets and with a very rebellious yell, and their slogan was beautiful, was, "Let's be realistic, ask for the impossible." And they sparked a movement that went all around the world. And yes, we had a lot of dreams. Some of them came true. In some we failed, and we failed badly. And in those that we failed badly are the ones that you're facing now. We have, as you were saying, a terrible crisis with the climate. We have a world where inequality is increasing at an alarming rates. When we think of education, well, those of you who have had an education are the lucky ones, the privileged ones, because half the children and young people in the world didn't have the chance to get an education. And we could make a long list of those things that are not working and are things that young people are worried about and want to do things about that, but want to do those things in a different way. We tried. And that's good because we failed. So it's not a bad idea to do it in a different way. So in terms of your question of how to succeed in that, I would say two things. And they are the same, and Doris, who should have spoken at the end, not at the beginning, already said it. First, of course, you have to get involved. You cannot wait for others to do your job. And the world, as I was saying, the world changes when we change it, so we have to be part of that, not just spectators. We have to participate. Participate how? I'm not going to tell you. Some will like to be part of politics, some would like to be activists, some would like to have a job and make a difference in the industry or the company that they are working. Some would be artists, and artists have been incredible in framing how we see, how we feel the world and how we change the world. So ways of participating are really for you to decide what to do. Do it with other people. Collaboration is something that is not just effective, but it's much nicer than do things alone. So, but that's something that these generations do much more than we imagine. Adults think that because you use social networks, you don't engage. That's, as you know, crazy. But the final thing, I think, is the most important. Sometimes I hear young people saying, I wanted to participate in this and they didn't give me the space, or they didn't allow me to. Listen, like in May '68 in Paris, young people don't have to ask for a space. They have to take it, and if you cannot take it, you make it. You don't have to ask for permission. You have to do what you have to do. We're living in a world that is better than the one we found, but it's a mess. And you have to take those places and change it. In the road, you will probably find some allies in the boomer generation, but you will also find a lot of people who cannot understand what you're doing. And as you were saying before, talk to them, explain them. They're not bad people, they are just boomers. What can we do? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leonardo. And I think that's part of the spirit of the Youth Declaration, but also I think all the activities that the SDG4 Youth Network and others in this space has been trying to carry out, which is to really create that intergenerational dialogue. I don't think anybody is saying that young people alone can solve this problem. I think what we are saying is that let's share power. Let's learn from the experience, expertise, wisdom from the older generations. Let's couple that with the lived realities of the unique expertise, innovation, creativity of the younger generation. Let's come up with better solutions than we did before. Thank you very much for your thoughts. Before we wrap up, I want to ask all three of you, you've been around today and you've heard so many solutions, challenges, ideas. What is that one thing, if you could summarize, that you will take home with you today? Doris, let's start with you.
I hope you're going to give me an opportunity to just say one thing before I get there. Today, I loved how we were talking about different things in education. We talked about gender, we talked about climate education, we talked about education in emergencies. And I remember one of the consultations I was with the UN Youth Envoy was the Solidarity Circle. And I will not forget one thing that the director for the United Nations Girls Initiative said. And she said that as young people, you need to learn one thing. You need to learn to be a good negotiator. And Leonardo just said one thing. You need to find what is your purpose within the pyramid. What are you good at? In essence, education is a very big topic. It's very overwhelming. There's a lot to do. But for you to be able to make change, you need to understand what exactly are you negotiating at and be strategic when you're advocating for that. Because sometimes as young people, we are called into a room and we are complaining about 100 things, but you have 5 minutes. You know, you need to pick your battle, be strategic about it, and challenge the status quo. You need to challenge the status quo. You need to demand more, demand better. And as he said, ask for the impossible. But for you to do that, you need to be strategic about it. So as young people, I think when we're going back to the Youth Declaration and asking for political momentum, let's be strategic about it. Let's find ways to also share that, not only with education partners such as the Global Partnerships for Education or UNICEF, or partners working within here, but other partners such as the private sector, partners that are working on other issues to see how we could bring SDG4 at the core of transitioning to a more sustainable future. So what do I take away from this? What I take away from this is that there's a lot of momentum for education. We really do want to do something about it. And I'm so hopeful for what happened with the Youth Forum here. And I do hope it continues, not just from this Youth Forum, even during the ministerial sessions in the next 2 days, and even after New York, because the learning crisis cannot be solved by 2 summits. We cannot challenge conventional learning system with 2 summits. There's a lot of work to do. So I hope we'll channel this momentum, this enthusiasm for SDG number 4, even past September in New York. And as young people, we'll go back to where it's important, our communities. Localize this enthusiasm, work with the organizations that are working in the communities to ensure that SDG number 4 is at the core of all that we are doing, and governments are investing in education. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doris. Your Excellency, what is the one takeaway that you take from today's discussion?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I think, thank you, Doris. Thank you very much for it. I think that Leonardo gave us a little bit the map here, the road map. Things is space has to be conquered. We have to move. Experience of all of us, humanity, is that the space is not there available all the time. You have to go for it. And this is a is a long process, no doubt. But it comes to my mind the sentence of a Brazilian singer. They used to say that when you make a step forward, you are not longer in the same pace. You have changed. That is what is needed. And what is needed in this process, which is a long process, and we have had this experience in our generation. We started in '68 with all this movement that Leonardo reminded us. It was not an easy movement, and it was not an easy process. And we brought up to here a world which is better in some senses than it was, is not as good as it should be, and mistakes have been done. But this is what we managed to do during this period. And now it's time for you to push this process and move forward. But for this is needed 2 or 3 things. You have mentioned Doris here. The first is the engagement of everybody. But engagement needs the sense of ownership of the process. And of course, there is not going to be at the very beginning clarity on what are the paths to be followed. And most probably, you are going to follow some paths, and we are going to be with you in this process, no doubt about that. We may follow paths that are not exactly what will lead us to success. But this is the way this process works. So what is needed is to keep engagement, is needed to keep the sense of ownership, and it's needed to keep the momentum. And the only ones that are prepared to keep the momentums are you. Because most probably, if not, things are not going to change. Things change when somebody is going there to make it change. So that is what I think. It's a process that we hope, and I hope that we will be together with you in this process that I'm very fascinating. I think I'm very excited about. So let's go for it. Let's do this first step, which is today. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Leonardo, what is your key takeaway from today?
Well, again, as my predecessors, I'll say 2 things. One is that today you've been talking about a lot of different things from very different perspectives, and that is one way to see how different we all are. The human experience is about the diversity. We are all different, and the problem is that we live in a world where, with much frequency, we transform differences into inequalities. And those 2 things are not the same. We can be different, but when you're unequal, then it starts reproducing an unfairness situation. When some people have a right and other people who are different in some way, maybe gender, maybe race, maybe nationality, they don't have that right, then that is not really a right, that's a privilege. So we have to be very careful in understanding this human diversity and how interesting it is that we are all different. In fact, and I remember I used to say this a lot when I was a minister in Costa Rica with the students, because you probably heard that we have to use tolerance and be tolerant. And for example, if I say that I tolerate you, it doesn't sound very nice. Tolerance is not enough with diversity. We have to enjoy diversity. We have to accept it, but enjoy it. It's beautiful. The nicest part of being human is that we are all different. So we have to enjoy that diversity and understand that behind that diversity, we are all equal. And that's why we should have the same rights. So that's one first thing I take from the discussions today. And the other is not something that I take from the discussions, but it's something that I think it's, from my own experience, important. We always talk that we should be critical, critical thinking and all those things. But usually we understand being critical with being critical of how the others think. Those who think different from me, then I'm critical of their thinking, and I build the argument to prove that they are wrong. And the real meaning of being critical is being critical of yourself or of your group or your association or whatever. And every time you're starting a movement, one of the important things is not just asking how the other could be wrong, but no, maybe we are wrong, and revise your arguments and strengthen your arguments. And if you're wrong, change your arguments, of course, but understanding the importance of being critical. I will finish with an anecdote of a professor at the university that it was terrible. He had this obsession with critical thinking, and he wanted his students to have critical thinking. And the way in which he understood whether he had been successful was when his students thought the same as him, which is exactly the opposite. I love when my students think differently than I. So that would be my advice. Be critical of yourselves.
Thank you very much, Leonardo, for your takeaway, but also for that incredible advice. In closing, I think we will all remind ourselves that we need young people not only today on Stakeholder Engagement Day or the Youth Day. We need young people throughout the summit process, in the next 2 days, in the pre-summit, rest of the pre-summit, but also at the Transforming Education Summit itself. So for an example, myself and this special representative of the Secretary General on Violence Against Children has written to all UN member states to ask them to include youth delegates in their national delegations in September to the Transforming Education Summit. So when you go home, reach out to your Ministry of Foreign Affairs and ask, who is in your delegation to the summit? Can we be a part of your country's delegation to the summit and hold them to account and reach out to them to also offer your contribution as young people who have now this experience of being a part of the pre-summit. My message to the young people who will continue to be with us throughout the youth declaration process is to also be very aware of our privileges and to always check in the room if we have everyone as much as possible represented. Do we have young people living with disabilities? Do we have multilingual young people? Do we have queer young people? Do we have young women and girls? Do we have young refugee migrants? Young people in all their diversity, are they represented? Are we taking into account all views? We will not all agree, as Leonardo said, on all the points, but we can certainly find common ground as a generation on the issues that we care about and this we want our leaders to focus on. And the fourth point point to summarize is something that Doris and Leonardo both said in terms of power and the spaces created for young people and stakeholders in civil society in general. And when I first started in my job and in my first 3 months, I was extremely frustrated because there were no avenues for young people to participate in intergovernmental processes at the UN. And I went to the Secretary General and I complained to him. There's no space, there's no funding. How am I supposed to do my job? And he said, listen, power will never be given to you on a silver platter. You will always have to fight for it because we still work in systems that perpetrate the inequalities that Leonardo was talking about, that are still colonialist, that are still patriarchal, that still perpetuate these inequalities that we see in society. So they'll not create spaces and fund them, and they will not make the visa processes easy for you and make all of it conducive and say, now come and make us hold us accountable. You know, you will always have to fight for it, and I think the best way you can fight for it is by building coalitions, by building support across borders, across continents, across issue areas, learning by the experiences of other youth activists. And I can assure you that those who have access to these decision-making rooms will continue to be your allies and continue to create spaces for you. Let's continue to challenge the narrative of seeing people still as beneficiaries of education, really understanding and recognizing them as partners and leaders when it comes to education, because education is not something nice that you for young people. It's a fundamental human right, it's a global public good, and it's a public responsibility. So let's act like it. Thank you very much for joining us today, and I now hand over to the moderators.